All right, so thanks for attending our presentation today about distracted driving. We're Group 2. I'm Nate.
I'm Jackie. Amanda.
Pierce.
And we're going to take you through some slides related to the marketing research project that we did. So go ahead. There you go. Thank you. So the first thing we needed to do when we first started talking about the project was to define the problem. And we've learned in class, of course, that there's a series of steps that you should take while doing so. And it first starts out with just simply recognizing what that problem or opportunity is. And when we first started talking about it, we kept things fairly high level. We came up with a statement here that we thought pretty much accurately described what we wanted to research. And we felt that through the use of new technology and consumer education, distracted driving may be mitigated in order to prevent accidents and to save thousands of lives each year. So the key there being that new technology and consumer education were a big part of our discussions near the beginning of the project. Step 2 said, why is this information being sought after? Some of these are fairly obvious. If we can prevent distracted driving, then we can save lives. We can also develop new technologies within the marketplace that other firms can create, which will ultimately help to create new revenue streams. So there's an opportunity for, I think, other businesses and even mobile developers for smartphone applications to sort of get on the bandwagon for this and help prevent distracted driving. Step 3, according to our problem definition, was to understand the decision-making environment. So a couple of the key questions that we discussed during this process was what's the likelihood of users actually blocking texts or calls while they're driving? And will they actually opt in for a service like this? We thought that, if we were to ask each other and we all said, well, we think we block services, then we asked ourselves, what would really happen in the real world? So we might have users that say, yeah, sure, we'll block text messages while we're driving, but they may not actually put that to practice in the real world. Another question that kept coming up at the beginning was to ask ourselves if we think auto manufacturers will adopt these new technologies. We think that they're a critical part of this process. In the coming years from now, in order to prevent distracted driving, we believe we're going to need some buy-in from the auto manufacturers across the states. Moving on to the problem definition, step 4 asks us to really look at the symptoms. So this is where we dove into a little bit more detail to try to hone in on what the original problem definition description was. And some of those symptoms that we came up with are the fact that we know the recent increase in accidents has been caused by cell phone use. There have been a lot of studies, in addition to some of the studies that we did here, that have proven that cell phone use has really contributed to an increase in distracted driving. Younger drivers are more susceptible to distracted driving through the use of cell phones. So we thought that was interesting, and that's definitely a symptom of what we were studying. And then the last one there, studies show that texting while driving results in a greater chance of an accident compared to talking while driving. So we didn't really compare the difference between talking and texting at the beginning, but after we talked through some of these symptoms, we really started to focus a little bit more on the texting aspect of distracted driving. So you can see there at the bottom, that's where we, again, sort of try to revise our focus for the marketing research problem. Step 5, according to our problem definition that we've learned in class, is to translate the management problem into a marketing research problem. And we know one of the things in order to have a really good marketing research problem and have that defined is you have to make sure that you're specifying what type of information the decision makers have to have in order for them to take the next step. That's a very critical part when you take this transition in step 5. So those 3 bullets really, I think, do a good job of describing what the accurate market research problem needs to be. And they're really just 3 questions. Does the technology exist that allows for blocking of text messages or phone calls? Will the average consumer actually agree to temporarily block these services while they're driving? And will auto manufacturers agree to integrate this technology into their cars in order to increase the user adoption rate? Those are 3 really critical questions that need to be answered in order for a decision maker to take that next step in figuring out how they can prevent distracted driving. Step 6 said determine whether or not the information already exists. So there's a lot of information on the web. There's been a lot of studies. And some of the things here that we bolded here, the hands-free Bluetooth devices, those have been around for a while. They definitely help out with distracted driving, mainly with phone calls, because the user can keep their hands on the wheel, and if they're shifting in a manual transmission, they don't need to worry about holding the phone with one hand and the clutch with the other. Mobile app solutions are still very limited for iPhone, Android, and Windows Phone. So this is something we wanted to look at, because for existing technologies that are out there, there may already be services that people can use to prevent themselves from either texting or making phone calls while driving. And interesting, one of the things we had tested out during our project was there's some mobile apps that will detect if you're driving automatically and then respond on your behalf, saying that you're in the car. You can even specify them to say that I'm driving, or if I'm driving over 10 or 15 or 20 miles an hour, if and only then respond by saying I'm driving. And therefore, if I'm walking or if I'm running outside at 5, 10 miles an hour, then it wouldn't respond because you're jogging. So there's some really cool technologies that are out there, but they still haven't really broken through, and they don't have a lot of market penetration. And actually, in our research, we did test that out, and we found that it was a little bit shoddy. We didn't really have good experiences with those apps responding accurately, so clearly there's some issues with the mobile app solution. And then the last bullet from Ford MySync. Ford, everyone knows them. They've got this new technology that really helps out with teenagers that are driving, and parents can control the volume of the radio, the ability to send text messages or phone calls through the phone, and various other things too, from speeding and other aspects of distracted driving. And that's still in a pilot stage. Again, it hasn't hit the mainstream market yet, but we think that there are some solutions that are right on the edge for us to be able to present down the road. So moving on to step 7, determine whether the question can really be answered. So this is, again, the fundamental thing we need to ask ourselves before we really take the next step. And we felt after our discussions that through the use of some of the primary and secondary data that's already out there, that at a fairly high confidence level, we think that we can determine whether or not distracted driving can be minimized through the use of some of the new technologies that are out there. That second bullet point is very important. We think, and we all agree, that a test market has to be conducted, because even if we go out and do a survey and we get 1,000 responses and we see a really good response rate in terms of people agreeing to block their cell phones or text messages, what happens in the real world may be a lot different than what we gather from observable or qualitative feedback. So that test market study, again, is a very important part for step 7. And then last but not least in the problem definition is step 8, state the research objectives. So what do we need to have identified by the end of the study in order for us to be able to make some claims and conclusions about our project? And those 4 were, do drivers acknowledge that the use of cell phones is contributing to the rise of distracted driving? Basically, are they buying into the fact that they're contributing to this while they use their phones? Also, if given the ability, will they agree to block their phones from, block phone calls rather, while driving? And the same question's asked, but it's in regards to blocking text messages. So we intentionally wanted to differentiate those two, because we think phone calls and text messages, although they both contribute to distracted driving, one of the things we wanted to gather out of this is whether or not people feel that text messaging is actually a higher contributor to distracted driving. The last one there, do drivers feel that driving while texting is more dangerous than driving while talking, or vice versa? Again, we thought that would be an interesting question and something that we could figure out in our research would help sort of convey why we feel distracted driving can be mitigated. So with that said, I'll pass it off to Jacqueline.
All right, so going into this study, we wanted to get a basic foundation of some of the psychological aspects that go into people and why they engage in distracted driving. So the theory that we applied to our study was the theory of planned behavior, and this theory bridges the gap between people's beliefs and then their actions. And the concept was proposed to improve on the predictive power of the theory of reasoned action by including the perceived behavior. So there are 3, the main factor that goes into one person's behavior is their intentions. And the three factors of intentions are attitudes, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. So intentions is someone's readiness to act. So if you can control their readiness to act and make a driver less willing to engage in distracted driving, then that, of course, will make the road safer. And we want to take a more proactive role rather than a reactive. We want to get to the root cause. So if we're able to address these psychological aspects, then maybe we're able to get to the root and act accordingly to reduce the amount of distracted driving that does go on in the roads today. So also, so this is over here. This is that's the main model of the theory of planned behavior. But there are there are people that
Just pointing at the screen.
what? No, I wasn't. I was pointing at the screen. I was doing a dual pointing, so that way I can see it and then they can see it. You know, right? So that was the original model, but there have been people that have gone on to try and tweak it to include risk perceptions in the model because that plays a factor, and they kind of think that it involves that risk perception can be included in attitudes and the perceived behavioral control. So the two main risks that people see while using a phone is one, the increase of crashing, but I think the bigger risk that people perceive is getting caught. And there's always a disconnect between risk and outcome. So I don't think that anyone thinks that they're going to get into a car crash, but people do think that cops are out to get them and that they're going to get caught texting. So I think that risk is definitely larger.
So do you think that because of the theory and because of what you're saying, and any kind of thing that we do in order to get people to actually to reduce their use of distracted driving is going to have to it's going to take the stick and not the carrot. In other words, we have to be able to show them these negative outcomes of getting a ticket, and not so much about protecting their own safety and health.
Yeah,
right?
because I think that it's definitely a way more drastic jump to think, oh, I could total my car and be in the hospital versus, wow, I could lose $150 and get an increased premium on my insurance. I think that's more realistic than the prior.
Yeah.
So in applying this theory to distracted driving, everyone's attitude towards distracting driving is it's bad. People shouldn't do it. But there's a difference between knowing what you should do and then doing what you should do. It's definitely a big gap that people are mindful of, but it's just hard to control those impulses that you have because we are all human, and that goes back to underestimating the risks that are involved in distracted driving. And everyone, I think it's funny that everyone thinks that they are a better driver than everybody else on the road. So people will say, well, it's bad for them to do it because I don't trust them. But me, I know that I'm a great driver and that I'm able to multitask when I'm driving. So, I don't need to worry about it. But yeah, all those other people need to be worried about how much of a threat they are to the road. Where in fact, when you're doing the same thing, you pose just as much of a threat as, the other person who's across from you doing it. So that's definitely something that you need to bridge the gap between the risk. And then subjective norms. In today's society, everyone is attached to their phone. Everyone always has it. If you leave it at home, people, if you get to school, some people will drive back home 20 minutes away just to get their phone so they can have it because it's kind of like a security blanket nowadays. And, everyone's always attached to it. Everyone's always on social media. So to completely turn that off when you're in a car, that's very hard to do. Some people have to throw in the glove compartment. I've heard some people putting it in the little slot that you have in the center seat. Putting it in there and closing it. That way you can't reach back to the seat. You would actually literally.
that seat.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
In the middle one where they have the divider. Some people that I know, they'll put it in there and put the divider up. That way they literally cannot even reach back while they're driving because that is also a distraction. Trying to get to your phone, so that way your phone can provide more of a distraction to you. It's double distraction. And then, today when you're driving, say I'm driving with a friend and someone's texting, I'm like, don't do that, it's terrible. But it's not the same as if my friend were drinking a beer and driving. It's not, there's not that same sort of stigma that goes with it. I don't think that people have realized how dangerous it is yet.
So?
No.
Even though all these messages are out there.
There are all these messages.
They're straight up being told that if you drink while, drive while texting or drive while surfing, then you're more likely to get in an accident than you were if you had 2 drinks and were driving. They're straight up told that, but you still don't think they don't know.
I think people perceive it as, when you're drinking and driving, it's like a continuous impairment Whereas when you're texting or, you know, going on the web, going on the email and driving, it's like for a quick moment, so you could, like, you know, quickly snap out of it and kind of, you know, adjust accordingly. So I think it's sort of like the on-off thing, whereas,
I can
you know,
stop at any time.
yeah,
I can stop
like,
at any time,
you know, like, yeah, it's kind of like people are like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. Like, I'm going to start doing this tomorrow.
Don't worry, as soon as the traffic clears up, as soon as the traffic gets bad, I'm gonna be off this phone.
Yep,
Don't worry, and then.
yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then there's less scrutiny with everybody, so that alone. And then the perceived behavioral control, going back to what I said earlier, people believe that they can, that, you know, it's only a text message, it only takes me 4 seconds. Well, you know, it only takes you 4 seconds to go from one side of the road to the other into a tree. So people are like, well, it's quick, like, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm a good driver. They rationalize their actions. They try and make themselves feel better. Everybody around me does it. I see everybody doing it, and I don't know anybody that's gotten into a crash. Well, it shouldn't take somebody getting into a crash for you to stop. So, because then you're being reactive to distracted driving rather than proactive. So.
Continue. Go ahead, start from the top, Ms. Henry.
All right. This section will talk about some of the secondary research that we did to support some of the questions in the problem definition and see what data was already out there to support some of our assumptions. There's actually a website, the official government website for distracted driving, that has classified texting as the most dangerous type of distracted driving. And they study all types: eating, drinking, doing their makeup, and talking to other people. And they considered that texting, due to the visual, manual, and cognitive distractions that it poses, to be the most dangerous of all types of distraction. They've discovered that a young driver's reaction time was slow to that of a 70-year-old just by texting. And you'll see some data here. Over 3,000 people were killed and over 400,000 people were injured in distracted-related crashes in 2012. And is actually expected to rise during 2013. And 23% of all car crashes can be directly attributed to cell phone use, whether talking or texting. That does include weather crashes, alcohol crashes, other distracted types, but 23% on its own was just related to a cell phone use. And we did discover that there was no safety advantages for using voice to text, but it did provide a false sense of security to those who were using it. So they did believe that they were being safer, and that they were kind of skirting around the anti-texting laws and regulations. The reaction time was still twice as slow, and there's actually more time in the voice-to-text spent than there was on the manual, and there was the same amount of time where their eyes were off the road. So there wasn't any advantages to this supposed safety feature that people are using, of using the voice-to-text applications.
As of what year, 2012?
Yes, 2012. After controls, cell phone drivers had more accidents and were less responsive than legally intoxicated drivers. So despite the fact that we talked about that there isn't the same stigma for distracted driving as there is for drunk driving, there's actually a higher rate of accidents and issues. And actually in the study that I read, there was 3 crashes in the study itself, participants trying to complete the experiment during cell phone use, and there was none for those that were legally intoxicated. Another study found that drivers' estimates of their ability to drive while distracted did not change over time. So even as they were introduced to different scenarios where they were using cell phones or voice-to-text or calling, even as they performed more and more poorly, they still estimated the same perceived ability before each trial. A lone driver using their cell phone is 4 times more likely to get in an accident, but having a passenger in the car actually reduces your chances of having an accident.
Is that so?
And part of that's attributed to when you have a passenger in the car, you're probably going to talk to them about road conditions, weather conditions, that jerk who just cut you off. So you're paying more attention because it's a conversation builder, and there's that accountability to having somebody in the car. You're responsible for them. If you're talking to them, you're not looking down. You're not going to look at them as much as you're going to look at a cell phone when you're texting.
And you got a second set of eyes in the car as well.
Okay, I understand.
Cell phone use, whether hands-free or handheld, reduce the amount of brain activity concentrated on traffic-related issues by half. In the reduction in, they saw a reduction in visual scans and mirror checks. So not only are you paying half attention, but you're also half aware of everything around you. You're not looking to the side to check your blind spot, just because you're holding that conversation that supposedly isn't distracting you. And feedback is actually the biggest role in the study I read where it played a role in calibrating people's estimates. It wasn't until they received feedback either in the car from a passenger or afterwards watching their driving or reading the evaluation from an assessor that they started to change their estimate of what their ability was. Self-accountability had no effect on that.
So we actually did our own qualitative study survey to see if our data matched what we actually thought. And we sent out quite a few invites to the survey, and we got about 30 responses back, which we thought in the short amount of time that we had was a decent response rate. What we found was that the age and gender of our respondents were fairly well distributed. On this next slide, you see a pie chart that shows it separates it out by the age, the gender, and the area that each of our respondents was from. So it was generally pretty well distributed, as I said. And we tried to keep it around the Rochester area, but we did open it up to people in Syracuse. I think we had one from New York and other areas within New York for the most part. So we did that.
I feel it was the distribution. Did you ask these questions on
Yeah.
the survey itself?
One of the questions was what's the closest city to you? We tried to keep the location as close to Rochester as possible because the Ad Council's data was within Rochester itself, so we thought in order for us to be relevant, it should be very close.
Great.
So what we found was the results for our phone calls questions. 90%, that first question there, 90% of the people we asked said they had made a call without a hands-free device within their car, and 71% disagreed with the use of some type of not ad blocking, some use of like call blocking software within their cars so that they couldn't receive phone calls while they were driving. But 84% did agree that making a call while they're driving increases the likelihood of an accident. We were a little confused at, or at least I was, why that percentage wasn't a little bit higher. 84% is pretty high, but you would think the people who responded would think that last question there, that driving while on the phone would increase the likelihood of being an accident. You'd think that would be almost 100%, but some people seem to think it was.
Who makes phone calls anymore?
I was about to say.
That's part of it. I mean,
Right.
young folks, you don't like to call anybody.
True.
And I know that because I flat out, it used to be if a professor gave a student their phone number, they were like a target for getting pranked. And now I give my phone number to students every single time. And I think students don't know what to do with a phone number. You know, they might send me some kind of nasty text. That's happened. But a phone number, they don't know even what to do with that. So I mean, I'm calling anyone.
True. I guess some of those negative responses could have been people who don't use their phone, I guess. But I think the question, I think generally just asked if you're using your phone while driving, is it more dangerous? So about 16% said no. So these are the results from our phone calls. We asked the respondents how many times per week they actually used their phone while driving.
There you go.
And what we found was 32% never used it. 45% made about 1 to 2 calls per week from while they're driving. 22% while driving. So I either received or
Shut up. All right.
started a call while they were driving.
This is outright.
22% said they made about 3 to 10 calls per week while driving, and no respondent said they had used their phone more than 10 times per week. So then we started asking questions about texting. What we found was 81% of respondents said they have texted while they were driving. 52% said they would agree to have their text messages blocked while they were driving, and I think we had 39% disagreed with the use of any kind of block software. And something interesting we found was that 100% of respondents agreed that sending a text message while driving increases the likelihood of an accident. So what that means is that there's a portion of people that agree that text messaging while driving is dangerous, but don't agree that being on a phone while driving is dangerous. So we asked the same question about texting, how many times per week do you do it? And what we found is that a greater proportion, at 42%, did not text while driving, but those who did text did so more often than those who made calls. We found about 23% texted 1 to 2 times per week, 16% 3 to 5 times per week, 13% 6 to 10 times per week, and 6% more than 16 times per week. So there's a small proportion that actually make quite a few text messages. Last slide. And one of our last questions was, is it more dangerous to send a text message while driving, or is it more dangerous to make phone calls while driving? And what we found was that 100% of people unanimously agreed that text messaging while driving is more dangerous.
Why do you think that is?
Partially, just making a phone call, you can actually have your phone up to your ear and be watching the road, I suppose. When you're texting, people tend to have it lower, and
Yeah, they have it lower because
having
they
your
don't
eyes
want to
away.
get caught by the cops.
Right.
Because I know that some people, before this, enforcement was being eyed on, they would text up on the steering wheel. That way they could still see and drive.
Right.
And because then you perceive it as, well, I can still see. So it's kind of like the phone being like, well, I can still see the road. But now people don't want to get caught because now cops have their eye out for it. And I think it's like 5 points on your license if you get caught in New York, something outrageous like that. So.
And keep in mind, our answers regarding phone calls are excluding hands-free devices. So that's somebody who's just holding the phone up to their ear and talking while they're driving.
Continue.
So in conclusion, a couple takeaways. The first one is actually really important, I think, that developing a bulletproof qualitative survey is very, very difficult. And I say that because a lot of the questions that we asked, there's edge case scenarios that you really have to think about, because in order for a user to actually answer accurately, like when we asked the demographic questions about what cities, originally we just asked if they were from Rochester, Buffalo, Albany, or New York. And then we found out that there were actually people who were taking the survey that were outside of those 4 cities, so we had to have an option for other. And basically we really needed to think really hard about every question and figure out what those edge case scenarios were, so that users could respond if they were part of the edge case. Also, we felt that, we found out that generally respondents disagreed to have their cell phones blocked from receiving phone calls. They think it's very important that they receive a phone call while they're driving, but they did agree, because we had over half of our respondents to agree to block their cell phone from receiving text messages while driving. So we thought that was very interesting. That kind of goes along with what we were originally stating in our problem definition, that we should probably focus a little bit more on texting while driving, because people may be more apt to use a service, even though the technology doesn't necessarily exist right now, that they may be more likely to opt in to have their cell phone blocked. And we mentioned temporarily blocked because obviously this would only happen while they're driving. The third bullet, roughly 16% of our respondents said that driving while talking does not increase the likelihood of an accident. We just got them talking about this. But 100% of our respondents said that driving while texting definitely increases the likelihood. So that's sort of that denial again, that people feel they can talk on their cell phone while they're driving, but everyone seems to agree that it's the texting that's really the big part of our distracted driving issues that we're seeing. And then the last bullet is if the technology was prevalent, if it was around, we feel that drivers would actually be more likely to opt in to temporarily block themselves from receiving text messages while driving, and this would obviously result in a lower percentage of distracted drivings, which ultimately could save lives. We talked about the new revenue streams that could occur due to the new technologies. Think of mobile apps that cost 99 cents or $1, or technologies that Ford can leverage and build into their pricing scale and licensing models that can generate more revenue for them and other car manufacturers as well. So those were our big takeaways and conclusions from our marketing research. At this point, we'd like to open up for any questions.
Got a few. Good. Thank you very much, guys. First question, Jackie, you were the one that presented the idea of the theory of reasoned action. Was it theory or
Planned behavior?
Theory of planned behavior.
Theory of planned behavior. So the results that you guys came up with, what does that say about the theory? I mean, is it consistent with that theory?
I think the results that relate to talking and driving, I think people are still in denial that they don't believe that it's a risk. And going back to the results, and that people are people are they're less willing to give up receiving a phone call. I think that also goes back to people thinking, well, I only get called if it's an emergency. So if it's an emergency, then it would be more okay for me to use my cell phone, sort of thing. So that goes back to the rationalization aspect of the theory, and sort of the social aspect of it, because if someone really needs my help, or if I'm really needed, then I can't say no to them, but you could put yourself in a bigger predicament than the person who's calling you.
How are you going to beat that whole rationalization? I mean, how are you going to beat human nature with this? I mean, that's basically what they're up against at Rochester Ad Council, and that's what I had you guys struggle with for the last 3 weeks. But how are you going to beat that?
It needs to be simple. The solution needs to be very easy. It can't be, like currently right now, in order for it to work with your cell phone, you've got to go through an app that doesn't work on all of our devices, because Windows and Apple, you have to have a specific Android model. And then furthermore, you have to know to have your GPS turned on, and it's just not automated. And I think in order for us to get a really high percentage of user adoption, it's got to be either integrated into the cars or very, very simple for them to turn on. And if it is easy, we think people actually would turn on their devices or disable them rather from text messages.
I think part of it too is time and education. As people are becoming more informed, they are accepting that when they first started to ban people calling on their cell phones, that's when they started to substitute text messaging. And so the attitude shifting that, okay, I'm not calling, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I'm texting, so technically it's not against the law. So there's that perception. And I think part of it too is it needs time to adapt that this is wrong and this is something that should be stigmatized. When they were presenting, and they talked about the seatbelt adoption and how originally that was weird that people were starting to wear their seatbelts, but now it's weird if you don't. I think over time it'll be weirder and weirder for people to commit an antisocial act like texting, as it is now not so antisocial.
Yeah, this will look good. This presentation will look good alongside the first 2 presentations, because one thing they talked about in presentation number 1 was this idea that people don't necessarily have to like an idea. They just have to think that everybody else likes the idea, and then they'll be okay with the idea. Presentation 2 talked about the idea that technology has this way of being so ingrained into people's lives that we can make it so that there's no way we can shut it off, right? And then my question for them was obviously, and that kind of creepy too. But I mean, in other words, as technology gets better, we're going to have the ability to make it so ubiquitous that their safety is just guaranteed. One thing I asked them about was the whole idea of wearable technology, and the fact that after a while people are going to be able to have the smart watch and smart eyeglasses. Is that going to play a role? I mean, we're just talking about the phone right now, but I mean, the phone might be a dinosaur in 10 more years. So we don't know.
I mean, going back to what Nate was saying about how it needs to be simple, wearing your seatbelt in driving, that's taken, decades to get people to, and it's still like click it or ticket. There, I still see signs on, the billboards that are like, if you do, it's state law, blah, blah, blah. Like, I just drove back from D.C. today, and there's a bunch of signs on the side. It's like, buckle up for the next 1,000,000 miles. And I'm like, well, duh. Obviously, who wouldn't use their seatbelt? And, even if I'm driving, like, from, the curb to, the parking lot, I still put it on simply because if I don't put it on, after 20 or 30 seconds, my car starts beeping at me to put my seatbelt on, and it won't stop beeping until I put it on. So if you have something like that integrated with your cell phone, then people will be like, okay, I'm just going to get my car to shut up, so I'll do it just so it's not annoying me. So that's something that they could, look into if that's an option in the future for technology.
Good presentation, guys. Well done. I will put this video together, and I'll probably do it next weekend, like Friday or Saturday.
Are you going to put this on my courses? Are you going to put this on my courses?
No, I'm going to put it on lolstudents.com.
Oh, well, no one goes to that.
So. No, that's what
Is that a thing?
I don't know.
What is that?
She just made it up.
I was like,
Yeah, see, I was like, no one. What?